Around here. Grab your worship flyer. Inside, you're going to find the verses as we put them every week, most of the verses. So we started a series almost 6 weeks ago, and we're going to close it out today. And we call it Go Fish. And the reason we call it that is because when Jesus showed up, he started to teach, and he started to reach people, and he started to invite people to follow him. But in the process, he invited something else as well. Matthew 4, verse 19, look on the screen. Here's what he said. He said, "Come follow me, and I will make you," say it all together with me one more time, "fishers of men." Exactly, good job. When people follow any person or anything, what happens? We tend to follow something or someone that has some kind of benefit to us, does it not? Right? You follow someone, you follow something, some philosophy, because there's some kind of benefit for you. My daughter right now has me on a detoxification diet, okay? She's going back to school. She's learning about gut health and body chemistry, and so she's testing things on me. So right now, Dad is on. So if I'm grumpy, just blame my daughter, all right? But you do things, you follow things like that because they mean something, right? Because you get some kind of benefit. You follow certain workout styles. Hey, we got the CG crowd in here, anybody? And we got the CrossFit crowd, and we can all go to war afterwards, right? But you probably follow one of those plans if you follow workouts because you believe in it. Educational systems are different. Dating advice, even relationship experts, we end up committing ourselves to philosophies and beliefs and things that we think are going to benefit us. So when it comes to faith in Jesus, whether you want to fully admit it or not, I know most of us have this really holy view of what happened when we first were introduced to Christ, but for most of us, if we're gut level honest, when somebody started to teach us about Jesus, here's what happened. We started to recognize there were some gaps in our lives, right? Like we needed something. And so we came to him, probably some of us, because we needed to be a better spouse, or we needed to clean up our lives a little bit, or we had some unhealthy habits, or maybe you wanted to be more disciplined or more successful, and you thought, you know what, this Jesus guy seems to be the guy who maybe can make some of that happen for me. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus, there are some incredible benefits to following him, right? I mean, think about it. If you follow Jesus, if you've gotten to know him very much, we all get excited about the results of prayer in our lives, right? Taking time to talk to him, seeing things happen, the peace that we can know in the middle of the worst times of our lives because we walk with him, the miraculous things that will happen sometimes that we can't explain. There's all of these crazy benefits to following Jesus, right? Those who discover him know that, right? But while we love following Jesus, it's different once you become a disciple, right? Once you start following him, he does something that you didn't really probably expect him to do. Probably nobody in here raised your hand the first time and said, "I'm going to follow Jesus," because you understood what it meant for him to make you a fisher of men, and neither did those disciples. So when he said, "I'm going to make you a fisher of men," here's what happened. He said, "I'm going to take your life skills, your circumstances. I'm going to take even the worst parts of your life, the things you thought, I can't ever live through this. How will I persevere? And I'm going to use it to reach other people with my good news." And so in this series, we've discovered, I hope, that to follow Jesus is to fish. To follow Jesus is to fish. For followers, fishing is not a suggestion. It's a result. It's not an option for those of us who follow. It's the result of following him, that we would reach out to a world and reveal a loving God to them, right? Because Christianity is not intuitive. It's not intuitive. It's not just something you can just know by going out and sitting under an apple tree somewhere. It's not like a math program or math formula that you can just figure out over time. Somebody has to introduce you to a historical, very real person who walked this earth, was crucified, dead, and buried, and got up himself and walked out of the grave. All to restore a relationship between us and God. So somebody outside these four walls, and maybe somebody inside these four walls, needs you to do this. They need you to sidestep the issues, right? Sidestep all the issues that are coming up in our world today, all the issues that get talked about and turned over in a church circle, and help them discover a Savior. Help them discover a God who loves them more than they can love themselves, and they may not even know that yet. So we've been working on this conversation. We have finally arrived at this one place where we ask the question, who is your one? Who is your one? It's not that I want you to only pick one person and only share the gospel with one person for the rest of your life. That's not what this question's about. This question is to help us make sure that we're always thinking of someone. That we always think about a person that God has brought into our circle, into our workplace, into our lives in such a way that doesn't know Jesus, that maybe needs to be introduced to him. Sidestep the issues for that one. At Journey, we've used a phrase in the past. In fact, when you walked in the doors this morning, you passed a little poster. You probably ignore it if you've been coming here a little while, where we say it this way: found people find people. That's what we're saying. Who's your one? Who are you going to fish for? And last week, just to make sure we were all on the same page, we went back and we said, well, what is the gospel message? If we're going to fish, if we're taking this good news, we have to make sure that we understand the good news. What is it? Go back and listen to the message if you weren't here last week. And by the way, when you get to the end of it, just follow me as best you can, because I flubbed last week. The ending is as bad as I've flubbed anything in a long time. But go listen to it anyway. You'll pick it up. You're smart. You'll figure out where I was really messing it up. But some of us may not have known the good news, the gospel as clearly as we laid it out last week. And others of us, even though we know it, we get nervous still about it. So we tried to really simplify it. We said there's two things with the gospel, two things that you really should know, and two things you really should do. And we pulled them all four from John 3:16, one simple verse that really contains this whole picture. And we said the two things you should know were this: that God loved and God gave. God loved the world. He didn't hate the world. He didn't show up to condemn the world. He wasn't out to get you. He loved the world so much that he offered his son in a sacrificial form. Right? It's something I said I wouldn't even do for you. Even if I like you, I'm probably not going to offer my kids for you. It's beyond my mind to think about, how did he do that? There's a love in there that we need to grow to understand, right? God loved, God gave. And what that leaves us with is two things we can do. We can believe, first of all, and we said that's what you did this morning when you walked in and sat down in that chair. You put your whole trust, your whole confidence, that chair was going to hold you up. That's what he's asking us to do. It's not just a mental understanding. It's a physical throwing your whole body, your whole mind, your whole soul into this thing, saying, I trust you with everything. We believe, and then we receive. We receive. We receive life everlasting with God. All of humanity are eternal beings. Don't get lost in this thing. You ever listen to musicians and songs and poets, and especially the creative side of our world? Everybody talks about what's next after death. There's all kinds of stories and poems and songs speculating and dreaming and thinking. Why? Because it's intuitive in us. That is intuitive. We are eternal beings. The thing a believer receives is that eternal life in the presence of God. So, God loved, God gave, we believe, we receive. Say it with me. God loved, God gave, God, we believe, we receive. Right. See, I'm still going to mess it up. I don't know why I get into that. That's how simple the gospel is. That's this whole 6 weeks in a nutshell. That's what we've been working on, that coming to that understanding of how simple this really is. And so when we get into the side issues, and somebody says, well, what about this literal 6 days of creation? Is it literal? I don't think it's literal anymore. There's science that says it's not. You don't have to know that. You don't have to answer that question. You don't have to answer that question for somebody to become a follower of Jesus. Hey, what about the dinosaurs? Where do they fit into this? We were at my nephew's birthday party this week, and my nieces and nephews are all like, Uncle Cecil, talk to us about these dinosaurs. I said, what do you want to know? Well, they're not real, right? And see, they said that because now my family, they're being raised within a Christian framework, and none of my brother, sister, and my family, we didn't teach them that. But that's kind of what they hear, is dinosaurs reflect more science, and that's not the Bible, and that's just not true. Right? I said, well, you have dinosaur bones, don't you? Then how are they not real? Unless God's trying to trick you. See, it's a whole other conversation. I don't care what you think about dinosaurs. The question is, what do you do with Jesus? You don't have to understand every one of the little bitty laws in the Old Testament. I don't know why. Other than to set them apart, I don't know why they had to wear the certain clothes they wore, right? The food. I was really happy when Peter had his vision and like bacon showed up on the table, okay? I'm sorry, in the New Testament, if you don't know that story, go there. It's a great story. You don't have to know all of the crazy images in the book of Revelation. God loved, God gave, we believe, we receive. There is the good news. It's that simple. And it all stems from a God who loves you beyond you could ever imagine. That's in John 3:16. I wanted to read one quick verse for you. I didn't put it in your bulletin, but I love this because at the end of John, he uses a couple of verses. He writes a couple of statements that I think just remind us of the simplicity of this whole thing. So in John 20, verse 30, he says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book." John's like, I couldn't write it all down. I couldn't even keep up with all of it, all right? I didn't have a Palm Pilot. Those don't even exist anymore, do they? I didn't have an iPod or iPad. I didn't have an iPhone to tap these things down in. Verse 31, "But these things that I put down, that I wrote, are so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the chosen one, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." It's that simple. So we're going to close the series today. And we're going to close it with a story you never saw coming. I guarantee you, nobody walked in here this morning, unless you're some kind of fortune teller. You did not walk in here this morning thinking, oh, Cecil's going to talk about 2 Kings 7, because this is going to be the craziest story. Some of you are going to say, I didn't even know that was in the Bible, okay? Because it's just one of those one-off stories. But there's a phrase and there's a purpose for this, so stay with me. Last week, I went to a little gathering down at Dallas Seminary with two of the guys from Journey, and we were talking about men's ministry. We were talking about men's ministry, ladies, not to leave you out, but because quite simply, if I'm brutal, ladies, you are much better at relationship stuff than men are. So we have to spend extra time trying to decide how we talk to each other. It's just what we have to plan stuff like this. Like, okay, we're going to go to a game and make sure that I've got like 10 or 15 questions, because I've only got one normally, and I don't talk to men that often, right? So we have to really plan this stuff out. And the guy that was leading the seminar is an old classmate of mine, and he made a statement. And the statement was genius. In fact, the three of us from Journey looked at each other and we said, write that down. That was really, really good. And he was talking about churches and he was talking about men's ministries, but he said, when you're fishing, if you're not catching anything, it's probably time to change your bait. Now, let me tell you what he's going for there. When we fish, that idea, that statement reflects that sometimes as followers of God, followers of Jesus, we get really settled. We settle in. There are some extremely great benefits to belonging to a church. Now, I get it. The churches are messy. Life is messy. People hurt each other. There are things we don't intend to have happen, but it's going to happen here because we're not perfect. But along with that are these really great things. Relationships. People that will pray for you. People that will help you when the world starts to fall apart. People that will walk with you. There's all of these benefits to being in a community like this. It's why the whole world wants to be in a community. And sometimes it's just easier to stay in that community than it is to fish, right? So we can get in a rut even. Like we can get in a rut and think, well, we fish this one way. We have this one event a year. Let's take Vacation Bible School for us. We encourage you to have your kids invite their friends, because that's a great way to meet new families, right? Well, if Vacation Bible School is the only way we fish, then we're probably going to get stuck in a rut. It probably is going to lose some of its power over time. If we're not catching anything, we need to change our bait. The danger is, as Christians, as followers, we get settled. We get settled and we like our life and we like our Bible studies. We like the groups we create around us. We like the people that are kind of like us. And we like being able to pull back and away from the world, where a lot of times we're always on the defense, right? And it just gets easier to stay in our little holy huddles, if you will, than it is to go out and fish. But the world is full of people who need, like you did at one time, need to be introduced to Jesus. Right? They're seeking for more. They're looking for that answer. The things the world can't fulfill, they're trying to get the answers to that too. So we need to intentionally change up our routines, change up our conversations. Even in times when it's people we don't like or who mistreated us, we still are called by God to fish. Turn to 2 Kings 7. 2 Kings 7 is this great passage in the Old Testament. Let me bring you up to speed because I just like to continue to highlight a little bit about the Old Testament every time we're in there. In the Old Testament, we learn about God, right? We start in Genesis. He's behind all of creation. We realize by Genesis 3, mankind has brought some real problems upon himself, right? We created the mess we're in. And then from then on, the Old Testament is this covenant relationship with God reaching out to mankind, beginning to reveal himself in a very real, tangible way, all for the purpose of redeeming us, bringing us back into relationship with the God of the universe. That's the purpose. To do that, God needed a voice on this earth. He chose the nation of Israel. People argue about this. People have weird conversations around this. People put the nation of Israel up on a strange pedestal. Let me tell you what's going on. He simply chose a people, a nation, as a vessel to bring his conversation, his word, a picture of himself to the world around them. That was their role. They weren't better than us. They weren't holier than us. And they certainly didn't do things better than us at times, right? So the whole purpose is God in the Old Testament revealing himself so that we can begin to understand a faithful God even when we fail continually. The nation of Israel in about 930 BC had a little bit of a civil war. They split. Put the map on the screen. You probably have seen an area like this, but I just want to show you what happened. In 930 BC, Israel split into what was known as the northern kingdom there in the blue, and the what kingdom in the south? Judah, the southern kingdom. Yep. Somebody knows more than the rest of us. We're getting good answers here from the second row with my dad. We had Israel in the north. We had Judah in the south, the northern kingdom and southern kingdom. Now here's what started to happen. The northern kingdom ran into a history where their kings were predominantly bad. They were just bad. They did not lead well. They allowed the people to walk away from God. In fact, they would lead them away from God. They would include pagan practices in the worship of God. And by that, I don't mean they let their kids go trick-or-treating, okay? They would take pagan gods and bring them right into the temple. They would bring all kinds of pagan practices. They would incorporate things. They were just royally messing up. They continually only looked out after themselves and were rebelling against God most of the time. The southern kingdom was the smaller kingdom, Judah, and it was almost always impoverished. And they were loyal to God. They were the ones that stayed with God, that walked more faithfully with God. In 2 Kings 7, there's a king that comes on the scene in the northern kingdom, and his name is Jehoram, and of course he is a bad king. At the time, God would use prophets, these people, who would speak into the lives of the kings and the nation so that they would pay attention to where they were messing up. Okay, I say the word prophet, and I know a lot of you have this picture in your head of like a fortune teller, somebody who comes out and can foretell these things in your life and kind of at a very personal level. Don't think like that. These prophets were by God, they were the voice of God, and they were to speak to the whole nation, especially in times when they were in disobedience and rebellion to God, and to bring them back around. It wasn't about individual decisions as much as it was the direction of the nation. What? For the purpose of revealing God to the world, right? So there's big things at stake here. And when these kings would come along and they would start to lead these people way off path, God would send a prophet to try to bring them back or to nudge them back. And it was never because he wanted to destroy the people. It was because he wanted them to be faithful to what he had promised them so he could reveal himself to the world. So Elisha shows up at the time of Jehoram and he says, look, you're messing up. In fact, you're leading us so badly God's going to invade this kingdom. He's going to allow this to happen. Now, no leader, anybody know a leader who likes to hear bad news, right? Anybody? Presidents, it doesn't matter who, kings, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're a leader, if you're president of a company, you don't want to hear bad news. At this point in time of the world, a lot of times if they brought bad news in front of a king, the king would just kill him. If he didn't like the message, well, it's just off the messenger, right? So they would just, these guys would come in, I'm sure, nervous. Elisha comes in, he goes, hey man, you're messing up. You're messing up, and God's going to allow us to be invaded. Jehoram hated that. About this time, Ben-Hadad, a king of Syria, decides to get his armies together. And Syria and Israel have never been friends, and Syria decides to send this group in to invade them. Now, the way they invaded, it says they besieged the city of Samaria. Now, what that means is they surrounded it, and then they just kept anybody from going in or out. When nothing goes in or out, that includes food and supplies, right? And you can't grow most of our food within the city walls. And so over time, what starts to happen, things get really, really bad. Now, things get so bad. I'm going to tell you how bad things get, and then I'm going to tell you to go read how bad some things got, because I just didn't even feel comfortable talking about some of this because it's kind of gross. But it got so bad, and I'm going to tell you the stuff I'm going to tell you is the stuff I can tell you, right? So you're about to freak out. I told my wife this week, I said, we're going to talk about something, and I told her, and she goes, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. Watch. Here it comes, honey. 2 Kings 6. It got so bad that the people of Samaria forgot all their dietary laws, and they started eating the heads of donkeys. Now, I can live with that. You might not be able to. My grandmother used to take the head of a pig and turn it into tamales. So I'm thinking, okay, a donkey, maybe there's something there. I can live with that. But then it got so bad, they started selling dove dung. Dove dung. Now I'm thinking, what do you even do with that? You put it in some water, stir it up? I don't know what you do with that. I mean, there's an image for you. Lunch afterwards, everybody, right? Took care of that for you. You don't need a diet today. And then go read 2 Kings 6, because then you're going to run into a story that you thought you'd never see in this of cannibalism with some mothers. And it's the worst thing you've ever read. If you're a mom, it's gut-wrenching. You just can't even imagine this. Those of you who thought the Bible was boring, congratulations, 2 Kings 6. Go read it. If they made it into a movie, I guarantee you your mothers would never let you see it. The whole point is what? Things are getting bad. Things are severe. These people are starving, right? Food is non-existent. When food doesn't exist, what happens to the price of food? It goes up. So as you can imagine, everything is now through the roof. This is where we're going to pick up the story. And Elisha comes in and he says, hey, king, I got a story for you. I got a message from God. Verse 1, 2 Kings 7:1. But Elisha said, hear the word of the Lord. In other words, what I'm about to say is not from me. Okay, this is from God. Okay, so listen up. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow, about this time, in 24 hours, a seah of fine flour will be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. What he's saying is, today the price of food is through the roof, but by tomorrow, in 24 hours, it is going to bottom out. It's going to bottom out. It's going to cost pennies of what it's been costing. Now, can you imagine hearing that? For that to happen, something else has to happen. Now watch this. Then the captain, on whose hand the king leaned. This is the king's right-hand guy. This is the guy that he just kind of, they sit there and they kind of lean on each other, and he probably, constantly talks with this guy. This guy supports him, has his back, is going to tell him everything he wants to hear. He says, then that captain leans in and says to the man of God, says to Elisha, if the Lord himself should make windows in heaven, could this be a thing? Like, he's just admitting, like this is impossible. Like, if God himself was involved in this, I'm not sure it could really happen, which is always humorous when you challenge God like that. And he says that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen in 24 hours. Now, next piece of the story. There's a side story going on here. Right at the city gates, are 4 leprous men. Leprosy is a nerve disease. It causes the body to begin to rot. You will lose sensation, and then you'll lose flesh and bone off your body. People will lose fingers. They'll rot off. It's absolutely, there's no cure for it. It's a terrible disease, and especially in their day, they had no understanding, and they had very little understanding of how to treat it, right? So those people with leprosy were often relegated to the gates of the city. In other words, outside the city gates. These people were shunned from their community. They could not work. If they got anything, it was because people donated stuff, just walked by and gave them, little things. Gave them a little bit of money, gave them a little bit of food. But they had a bad life to begin with. I was thinking this week, we often in our culture will say, hey, how's your week going? And what's your first response? Give me a response. Good, yeah, good. Mine's always been fine. Fine, it's fine. And I start to think we're so fake sometimes. It's like, how do you come up with better responses? I actually got, if you've had a really, really bad week, like if you can start to relate to these lepers, I hope you don't, but if you can relate to these lepers, I call it SAL, the Starving Abandoned Leper Week. Okay, SAL, Starving Abandoned Leper. So maybe from now on, if you're having a really bad week, just tell me, man, I'm having an SAL week. Make sure you say SAL. Okay, there's another acronym in there, but don't say that one. I'm having one of those kind of weeks, right? These guys are having terrible lives. We're going to pick it up where they start to have a conversation. Because if the city's not eating and they're outside the city gates, are they eating? Yeah, they're not eating anything. Verse 3. Now there were 4 men who were lepers at the entrance of the gate, and they said to one another, why are we sitting here until we die? It's kind of like they have this little epiphany, like we're just sitting to die. Like, think about it, guys. I mean, just because they have leprosy, they're not trying to give up in life, but they're all of a sudden it occurs, we're sitting here just to die. Verse 4. If we say, let us enter the city, option 1. Let's enter the city. The famine's in the city, and we'll die there. Okay, option 1. Let's go back into the city, but we're going to die there too. Sit here, die. Go there, die. Next option. If we sit here, we die also. Oh, okay. Option 2. Go in, die. Sit here, die. I mean, these guys are having a great week, right? So now, come, let us go over to the camp of the Syrians, our enemies. If they spare our lives, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall but die. 3 good options. What do you choose? Die, or die, right? Maybe I hope you're feeling better about your life this past week now. They pick the Hail Mary option. They think, well, if we just sit here, we're going to die. If we go into the city, we're going to die. But at least let's get up and do something, right? These guys were not completely without hope. They wanted to live. They knew they were in a bad life, a bad way. But think about it, if their own communities had rejected them, what were they thinking? Now remember, Elisha said, in 24 hours, price of food's going to drop. To 24 hours, everything's coming down to pennies. So something's got to happen, right? And these lepers, these outcasts were at the front end of what happened. Pick it up in verse 5. So they arose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. And when they got to the edge of the camp of the Syrians, behold, there was no one there. For the Lord had made the army of the Syrians hear the sounds of chariots and horses, the sound of a great army, so that they said to one another, behold, the king of Israel is hired against us, the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt, to come against us. Now, I don't know what they heard in the middle of the night, and please don't. I always find myself, when I start judging people's responses in the Bible, listen, anything go bump in the night recently and you pull the cover up over your head a little bit more because you didn't know what was out there, right? Your wife's kicking you, get out of bed and check that out, and you're like, I ain't going out there. You go out there. Something scared a whole army, an army big enough to surround a city. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's supernatural. I know God did it. God caused it. Whatever it was, they heard something go bump in the night enough to drive them out of there. Keep 7. So they fled away in the twilight and abandoned their tents, the Syrians, their horses and their donkeys. There's more food for you. Leaving the camp as it was and fled for their lives. And when the lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into the tent, and it says they ate and they drank. Now, I'm going to read the rest of this, and it just sounds really like matter of fact, but I'm going to paint a different picture because I think something big is going on here. The lepers went in, they ate and they drank, they carried off silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them. Then they came back and entered the tent and carried off things from it and went in and hid them, went out and hid them. Here's what I think happened. I think they walked in and they were just totally shocked. Can you imagine the excitement? Like, first of all, we're 4 lepers. We're walking to our death. Let's be honest, they admitted it. We're walking to our death. Right? We can stay here, die. We can go into the city, die. We can go there. We're probably going to die, but let's just go there. Like, let's take the journey together. They know this was not the best decision. When they walk in, all of a sudden, nobody's there. And not only is nobody there, all of the best stuff has been left. These lepers, the people who've been cast out of their community, who had nothing to show for in life, who lived like we will often see homeless people living under road passes, overpasses. They were living like homeless people, and they walked into wealth they could have never imagined. And they went nuts. Okay, and maybe this is just my 80s side talking, but I think they flipped on Lionel Richie's all night long, and they got after it, okay? I'm telling you, they went from tent to tent, and they ate too much because they hadn't been eating, and they drank too much because they hadn't had anything probably like that in years, and they just started plundering the whole community. And they knew that people weren't going to believe them, so they started hiding this stuff. And they just went after it. Eating, drinking, consuming. In their wildest dreams, they never saw that day coming. Can you imagine that scene? You have. I know you've imagined that scene. Anybody sit at your desk and dream about winning the lottery? I do it all the time, but I don't buy a ticket, so somebody help me out, right? I mean, it's like, I dream about money that I don't have. Anybody sit there and try to search websites looking for a long-lost relative you didn't know that maybe was a multimillionaire, right? You ever think what would happen if you stumbled upon that kind of wealth and nobody else was around? See, I think we've all dreamed about that. When life could be better than we could have ever imagined. These men were as good as dead. Their communities had rejected them. And they just walked into a surplus they never saw coming, right? Now, you're probably asking the question. It should be intuitive a little bit. What next? Like what next? This is really good news for them. But what about their community? What about the people they left behind? How does this all play out, right? And they must have been thinking it too. Do we have to go back? What happens? Do we need to return? Do you return to a king and a people that had kind of kicked you out? Do you return to a whole community that was in rebellion against God? Do you return to the place where they were just going to let you starve? A whole nation that was under judgment? A whole city? In that moment, something happened to those lepers. They had an epiphany. Something inside them spoke. Verse 9. They said to one another, "We are not doing right." They had been shunned. They had been treated poorly. They were outcasts. And yet they said, "We are not doing right." And then watch this next phrase. This day is a day of good news. This day. This day, when God did something beyond what we could have ever imagined, is a day of good news. And it's not just a day of good news for us. It's a day of good news for everybody. It's a day of good news for all the people, even the people that we don't always like, that we've had fights with. It is a day of good news for the nation. God has pulled his judgment back, given us a reprieve. He's revealing himself again a little bit more. And when you fast forward to the Gospels, to the New Testament, you come upon the greatest news the world's ever heard. And you say, "Yeah, Cecil, I get it, but it doesn't." I hear people say that. You preachers say it all the time. You pastors say it. You think it's cute. Listen to me. I get that we all live in messes. I get that we have messy relationships and home lives and marriages are not always great. And I get that our kids are sometimes kicking us in the teeth or we're kicking them in the teeth, one of the two, depending on your week. I get that jobs go away. right? I get that resources dry up. I get that churches are full of hypocrites, people who can't get it right. I get that we mistreat each other sometimes and we're not always nice to each other. I get that the followers of Jesus Christ have messed up in big ways on TV even these days. I get that the whole world is looking at us thinking, what is it with you guys? Well, let me tell you what. This is what it is. It is good news. It is good news for the worst of us. That's why we hold on to it. Right? And in our community, here's the problem. We go back and forth with this. We get sidetracked with all the side issues, right? We keep talking about our personal preferences. What do? They keep us so occupied that we just stay busy. We don't think about God. The good life that we live in this area is so good that we don't have to think about certain things if we don't want to. And then the benefits, add in the benefits of being in community as followers of Jesus, life's really good. Yeah, there's little bumps along the way. Yeah, there's things that happen. But for the most part, our lives are really, really nice. Just like those 4 lepers that walked into the greatest thing they'd ever known. Yet in the middle of that and all that comfort, there's this dilemma. Do we go back? Do we go back? Do we leave the comfort of home? Do we leave the comfort of community? Do we leave the comfort of community groups? Right? Do we leave the comfort of just the friends that we've always had? Do we leave and go out like the lepers who discovered something? And I want you to write down this one thing, and some of you, if you're really intuitive, you're probably going to go, hey, I think I heard that once in a scene from Spider-Man when Uncle Ben was dying, but here's how I phrased it, and I think this is what the lepers would have said. With great discovery comes great responsibility. With great discovery comes great responsibility. Those lepers didn't just discover, listen to me, they didn't just discover wealth, okay? They discovered what God could do. Followers of Jesus have discovered what God can do. It's not that we're mandated to go stand on a street corner and be weird and even rude with people. That's not it at all. We talked about this for the last 6 weeks. It is that we have discovered something that's so good, that's so revolutionary, that we have to go back. We have to go back to the places that we might not always be comfortable in. We might not always want to go back, but we have to go back to those places. Why? To reveal again what we've learned. The greatest love story that's ever been told. God loved, God gave, we believe, we receive. And that discovery produces a massive shift in your life. So here's how we think now. Here's how we should think. Who you invite to lunch? I get it. We're all busy. Right? I get that our schedules are super full. In fact, our schedules are so full that Sunday mornings is no longer protected in our culture. I get it. I'm there with you. I feel the pain. It's like the culture is squeezing all of our connections out, but they're not replacing it with God activity, right? With going out and fishing. They're replacing with activities to keep us distracted and away from fishing. So when you get an opportunity like a lunch, what do? If you're like me, you tend to think about your best friends. Who can I have lunch with this week? Who have I not seen in a while? Perhaps it's time to shift our thinking, to change our bait, to fish a little differently, to invite some people to lunch that don't know Jesus. Who do you send books and messages to? You know, we're really good at forwarding stuff to each other, but who do you intentionally start talking to online? Who do you intentionally start sharing things with? An old friend who trusts you, who might want to begin to listen to what it is you've got in your life that you understand that they don't, right? Who do we have over for dinner? Who sits at our table? The table is one of the most guarded. In fact, in our culture, to be honest, a table's kind of been abandoned because we're too busy, so we eat on our laps in front of the TV. I'm guilty of it. But the dinner table is this really private place because that's where people we know and love and really have some kind of camaraderie or friendship with. We invite them there. Well, perhaps we need to invite more people to the table, right? The good news begs that we consider our bait. The good news begs that we consider everything we do in our lives, the things we do on a daily basis, the things we say, the places we put ourselves, the order in which we live our lives, right? For the sake of people who need the good news. Those lepers remembered others at a time when they didn't have to. And now the call is for us to do the same. To follow is to fish. To follow is to fish. With great discovery comes great responsibility. And now, the ultimate question, Journey, who's your one? Who's your one? Do you have that name yet? It's okay if you don't. See, we're not going to ask you to stand up and give us the name. Please don't do that. Don't put it. By the way, don't get on social media and put your name. Here's the one I'm praying for, because they might be one of your friends, and that's a little awkward, is it not? I mean, hopefully you know that. But who's your one? Who's your one? Let's be like those lepers. Let's recognize good news in spite of a really terrible life, some horrible circumstances, and let's be willing to go back. To go back and find the one that God's put in our lives. All for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, and that they'll join us one day in eternity. All right? Let me pray for us.